This is Brian of Trifonic, and today I wanted to show you a little bit about how I use EXS24. I'll show you a little example of something in progress. At the end of the phrase you'll hear a little lead slash bass twisted part that comes in, and then I'll show you a little bit about what's happening with that and why it sounds the way it does. So here we go. So the part that I wanted to show you plays the end of sort of each 8-measure phrase. It's this thing here. So if I play this sound on the keyboard, it sounds like this. So pretty twisted, right? So you might be wondering how I got that sound. So basically, the key to that sound and where I did most of the processing is in this unit that I have over here. This thing, the EMu E6400 Ultra. So the EMu E6400 Ultra is basically a sampler that was back in its day was pretty powerful and still is pretty powerful. And what's really cool about it is it has these filters that can morph between filter states. So it can go from low pass to morph between to band pass and shelf filter, and it does that all in sort of a mysterious way. In any case, it ends up sounding pretty good because it's subtle, but it adds a lot of motion to the sound. And when you take those units and you clip them, so you take the whatever you sample into it. So in the case of this sound that I have in here, basically I started with a soft synth, then I ended up just starting with a basic detuned saw waveform type patch, sampling it into this EMu, and then doing a bunch of post-processing on that. So inside of the EMu, gaining it up like plus 24 dB just so it clips the hell out of it. But because it's an actual piece of hardware and it has, it's a nice piece, it has pretty good converters, so all that clipping internally ends up actually sounding pretty good. It just does it in kind of a musical way, and then you throw that filter on top and layer things a few times, and you end up with some pretty twisted sounds. Now part of this sound that gives it the character that it has is that it's really time stretched. I did the time stretching on the EMu itself because I like the way that in some ways it's like a bad sounding time stretch, but it's very grainy. And so for this sort of sound, it just emphasizes the warped nature of it. And then what I did is sampled each note out and just made a kit in EXS24, so I could show you the mapping that I have here. So it's just a number of different zones, and it's basically, they're all held out as long as I could for each note. So if I play a note that's higher up on the keyboard, also pretty harsh, and it's playing it back faster because I only had one sample on the EMu, so it's being stretched out, played at slower and faster speeds depending on what range I'm in. In any case, in terms of EXS24, I think what makes this flow the way it does is actually this Legato Mode here. So basically what that's doing here, when notes are played next to each other in time, so where they overlap, it's not just one note ends and then the next note starts, it doesn't re-trigger any of the envelopes. It also will pick up with whatever the next sample is you trigger where the previous one left off. So imagine that it was a drum sample and it gets 3/4 the way through this particular drum loop, and then the next key triggers another drum loop. Instead of starting that next key drum loop from the beginning, it would start 3/4 of the way through and finish all the way out. The way with samples, where sometimes they can sound kind of repetitive, especially the beginning portion, you can get a more natural thing happening. So let's just listen to this phrase with legato mode, and then I'll just put it in the normal monophonic mode. You can hear the difference. So here's with legato. And then here's in mono mode. So it's kind of a totally different thing. Even the pitches of it are different. It's mainly because this sample, during the course of holding down a note, it pitches up and down. It has a lot of movement in it anyway. So when it's re-triggering the sample from the beginning each time, it ends up getting a different kind of melody happening than when I have this legato mode, and it's basically, you know, transitioning between the samples and not starting over from the beginning each time. So here it is in mono mode, so where it's going to re-trigger the sample each time. And I can play a phrase like that, but you can hear that it's the same sample each time. I put it in legato mode. And it transitions a lot smoother between the different pitches. So that for that particular sound, that works well. The other thing I have going on here that I think makes this sound good is this filter is on. It's set to a low pass filter, but notice the cutoff is all the way open. So I'm not really filtering anything. But what this allows me to do is add a little bit of drive, so overdrive the input of this filter. That helps thicken it up. I also have this in unison mode and with 4 voices. So each note I'm playing, it's triggering 4 voices, which increases the volume quite a bit. Yeah, so that sort of helps this sound. And I'll show you some of the other sounds that I've made on the with the EMu that I've then sampled into EXS24. Been inspired by artists like TB and Noisia that do all the crazy drum and bass, you know, make all these crazy bass sounds. And it's not that I'm necessarily interested in doing that, but I like to have something in the background that just hints at something more sinister and twisted, and then just do beautiful emotional music that's on top. But you know, that hints and a little bit of a homage to, you know, those inspirations. Basically what I did is I spent a day with the EMu with just one sample that, like I said, was the various saw waves in a soft synth, and then just kept processing the sample more and more, and each time tediously recording each note out, and then each iteration making a new kit. So here's one of them. Got a couple others here. So I tried to stretch things as far as possible, just get the dirtiest sound that I can. And even something like this, which is kind of overwhelming, there's ways that I can make this fit in better. So one example is using a notch filters. So I could use, I could use an EQ to do that in Logic, because there isn't a notch filter that's built into EXS24. I also like to use Reactor sometimes. It has a nice notch filter. This is called the Menace filter, I believe, by Noise Rec. And so basically it's just dual notch filters. So what it does is it helps thin out the sound, because it has 2 notches and you can select where they are, and it has LFOs that you can assign to move those notches as well. Also has a high pass and low pass filter, so you can help focus the sound into whatever context you need. So it takes up a lot less space like that. Obviously it doesn't have the same amount of balls, but either way, you know, it's really about doing what's appropriate for the context and not always about having just the biggest sound ever. So I'll show you a couple other iterations of this. And then here you can hear it really stretched out. Basically ended up with 21 different versions of this sound that are all a little bit different.